It's Bard here, and welcome back to another evening of nocturnal stories. Tonight, we're venturing into the haunting ruins of Osgiliath, a place where the echoes of a forgotten age linger in the air, where the shadows of the past intertwine with the fading light of the present. Picture yourself wandering through the crumbling streets of a city that once stood as the heart of Gondor, where the Ambience river flows quietly beside you, its waters holding the pride and sorrow of a storied history. As the sun dips beneath the horizon, casting a golden glow over shattered remnants, you can almost see Osgiliath in its heyday, gleaming, alive, a testament to unity and strength. So settle in, dear listener. Whether you're wrapped in a warm blanket with a cup of tea, or simply letting the worries of the day slip away, this tale will take you deep into the heart of Gondor's legacy, a land where every stone holds a memory, and every whisper might be the echo of a hero's courage. Let the fire crackle softly in the hearth, casting its gentle glow across the room. The night outside is calm, and the stars twinkle faintly in the sky, a perfect setting for a story that speaks of both glory and decline. Tonight, as we explore the ruins of Osgiliath, and let the story carry you away to a time when hope and resilience fought against the encroaching darkness. Now, let's take our first step into the echoes of Gondor's past, where the heart of a great city still beats faintly beneath the stones. The twilight sky cast a fading golden hue over the ruins of Osgiliath. The Ambience river flowed gently. Its calm waters reflected the muted colors of the dusk. The once great city, a beacon of Gondor's power and unity, now lay in quiet decay. The stones of its grand buildings had crumbled, overtaken by moss and vines that crept between the cracks, reclaiming the city piece by piece. The air was cool, and the stillness of the evening seemed to hold the breath of ancient times, long forgotten. A lone figure walked slowly through the broken streets, their footsteps soft against the worn cobblestones. Each step echoed faintly, but nothing disturbed the peace that had settled over Osgiliath like a shroud. This was once the heart of Gondor, built by Isildur and Anarion, sons of Elendil. At the end of the Second Age, they had ruled from here, with the Ambience flowing between them, each side of the river reflecting the other in perfect harmony. Osgiliath had been their joint capital, the symbol of their shared rule. The city had not always been this way. The figure paused by the riverbank, their gaze drawn across the water to the distant ruins of the eastern bank. The Ambience was wide and slow here, its gentle current barely making a sound as it passed beneath the crumbling remnants of the great bridge that once connected the two halves of the city. Osgiliath had mirrored the splendor of Numenor, a testament to the wisdom and power of the Dunedain. Its towers had once gleamed in the sunlight, its streets had bustled with life, and its people had lived in peace. But the echoes of that time were all that remained now. As the figure continued to walk, they reflected on the city's history. Osgiliath had stood as a symbol of Gondor's unity, the jewel of the kingdom. Its greatness had not only been in its size or beauty, but in the hearts of the people who called it home. The Great Star Dome, where the Palantir was kept, had once housed scholars who looked to the stars for guidance, much like their ancestors in Numenor. Now the city was silent. The Palantir lost long ago to the waters of the Ambience. The figure's thoughts drifted to the city's decline, slow, yet inevitable. War, plague, and the passage of time had worn away its splendor. Osgiliath had seen the rise and fall of kings, the struggles of men, and the shadow of war. Yet it had endured. Now all that was left were its ruins, standing as a silent reminder of what once was. As the last light of the sun slipped below the horizon, stars began to dot the sky above. The Anduin flowed on, indifferent to the fate of the city that had once thrived on its banks. Osgiliath was no longer the jewel of Gondor, but in the quiet of the evening, there was still a peace to be found among its ruins. The ruins of Osgiliath whispered with the echoes of a forgotten age, and as I wandered through the broken streets, I could feel the past lingering in the shadows. The sun, now dipping beneath the horizon, cast a golden glow over the shattered remnants of the city that once stood as the heart of Gondor. The Anduin River, flowing quietly alongside me, had seen it all. Its waters carried both the pride and sorrow of Osgiliath's history. In this fading twilight, I could almost see the city as it once was, gleaming in the light of its heyday. I stopped, my gaze settling on a cluster of moss-covered stones that might have once been the foundations of a grand building. Osgiliath had been more than just a city. It had been a symbol of unity and power, built by the hands of Isildur and Anarion, sons of Elendil. It was the jewel of Gondor, its beauty and strength a mirror of Numenor's lost glory. I closed my eyes, letting the memories of old stories wash over me. In the days of its splendor, Osgiliath had been a thriving metropolis. Markets brimmed with life, the air thick with the scent of spices from distant lands. Gondorians in rich robes walked the broad streets, and the grand bridges spanning the Anduin hummed with the bustle of trade and travel. And at the heart of it all stood the Star Dome, a gleaming observatory that reached for the heavens, where the scholars of Gondor studied the skies and charted the courses of stars, seeking wisdom in their movements. I imagined the grand structure now, standing tall atop its hill, the silver dome reflecting the bright sun of Gondor's golden age. Beneath its roof, wise men pondered the mysteries of the cosmos, linking the fate of men with the stars above. It had been a symbol of Gondor's thirst for knowledge, a thirst inherited from Numenor, whose influence was present in every corner of the city. The Anduin murmured beside me, drawing me back to the present. But in my mind, I was no longer walking through ruins. I could see Osgiliath as it had been, a shining capital, full of life and promise. Soldiers in their polished armor patrolled the streets, their banners flapping in the breeze. Gondor's might was unquestioned then, and Osgiliath, straddling the river like a sentinel, was a beacon of strength and unity in a world fraught with danger. But even in those bright days, there had been darkness on the horizon. The shadow of Sauron, though driven into hiding, had never truly been vanquished. His minions still lurked in the wild places of the world, and all too soon, his wrath would fall upon the city. The War of the Last Alliance loomed large in the city's history, and in the minds of its people. I could recall the stories I had been told of that time, how Osgiliath's walls had been tested, how its streets had run with blood as Sauron's forces sought to destroy the city and break Gondor's will. And yet, Osgiliath had endured. Under the leadership of Anarion, the people of Gondor had stood firm. The armies of Mordor had been driven back, their Dark Lord's power broken, at least for a time. I paused at the remnants of what had once been a towering gate. The stones, now crumbled and worn, bore faint traces of intricate carvings, once the pride of Gondor's masons. Here, Anarion himself had led his soldiers in a valiant defense, turning back the tide of darkness that sought to claim the city. His courage and wisdom had saved Osgiliath in that hour, and the people had looked to him as a hero, a symbol of their strength and unity. The city's triumph over Sauron's forces had become a legend, passed down through the generations. Osgiliath had not fallen to the might of Mordor. It had stood tall, a beacon of hope and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Even now, as I walked through the crumbling streets, I could feel that same spirit lingering in the air, the sense that, once, this city had been a shining example of what Gondor could achieve when united in purpose. I lingered by the riverbank, watching the fading light play across the water. The Anduin had been witness to all of it, the glory and the fall, the moments of triumph and tragedy. As I stood there, lost in thought, I could almost hear the echoes of that time, the clatter of hooves on the stone streets, the laughter of children running through the markets, the proud cry of soldiers preparing for battle. Osgiliath had been a city of dreams, a place where the past and the future met. It had been a reflection of Numenor's greatness, a testament to Gondor's power and resolve. But, like all great cities, it had its weaknesses, and though it had withstood the might of Sauron's armies, it would not be long before other forces from within, began to chip away at its foundations, starting the long and slow decline that would eventually lead to its ruin. I stood there for a long time, the quiet hum of the river the only sound in the fading twilight. Osgiliath had seen so much glory, war, and sorrow, but even in its ruins, there was a sense of something enduring. It had been more than just a city. It had been the heart of Gondor, a heart that, though broken, still beat faintly beneath the stones. The light of Osgiliath's golden age had long since faded, but it was not Sauron or his dark armies that first dimmed its brilliance. It was the treachery within. As I wandered further into the city's decaying heart, the stories of old came back to me, the tale of Gondor's darkest hour, the kin strife, and the devastation it brought to this once united realm. The kin strife began in TA 1437, a time when Gondor was already strong and prosperous. But under the surface, divisions festered. Castamir the usurper, a captain of the ships, coveted the throne that rightly belonged to Eldacar, the rightful king. Castamir was of pure Númenórean blood, and many among the nobility supported him, believing that only those of full Númenórean descent should rule Gondor. Eldacar, half Northman through his mother, represented a broader, more inclusive vision of the kingdom. The war that followed was brutal, tearing Gondor apart. Osgiliath, once the proud capital of this mighty realm, was caught in the storm. It was here that Castamir's forces unleashed their fury. The streets that had once been filled with the sounds of bustling markets and the hum of scholarly debate became battlegrounds. Buildings that had stood for centuries were burned, and the blood of brothers stained the stones. The heart of Gondor was bleeding from within, and the city that had once represented the unity between Isildur and Anarion now bore witness to the kingdom's bitter divisions. As I stood among the crumbled remains of what might have once been a palace or a great hall, I couldn't help but reflect on the folly of man. Osgiliath had withstood the might of Sauron's armies, the dark forces of Mordor pressing upon its gates. But it was internal strife, brother against brother, Gondorian against Gondorian, that dealt the most grievous blow. Castamir, in his ambition, had laid siege to the city, sacking it in his bid for power. His forces burned much of Osgiliath, including its most precious treasure, the Great Dome of Stars. The Palantir, the seeing stone of Osgiliath, was lost in the Anduin during the sack. Some said it had been cast into the river deliberately to prevent it from falling into Castamir's hands. Others whispered it had been lost in the chaos of battle. Whatever the truth, it was a grievous loss for Gondor, one that signaled the beginning of Osgiliath's long decline. the once proud city, the heart of Gondor's power and knowledge, was never the same after that day. I moved through what remained of the city, the crumbling walls barely standing against the winds that now swept through the ruins. The echoes of the kinstrife lingered in every shadow, a reminder that no city, no kingdom, was invincible when its people turned against one another. But the kinstrife was only the beginning of Osgiliath's suffering. Not long after the city had been sacked, another catastrophe descended upon Gondor, the Great Plague of Ta 1636. Unlike the kinstrife, the plague struck silently, creeping through the land like an unseen enemy. Osgiliath, already weakened by war and division, was particularly vulnerable. The disease swept through the streets, claiming the lives of thousands in a matter of weeks. The bustling markets and thriving neighborhoods I had imagined in Osgiliath's prime were now filled with silence, broken only by the occasional cough or the mournful wails of the dying. I walked down what had once been a major thoroughfare, now overgrown with weeds and cracked by time. In the days of the plague, this street would have been deserted, the windows of houses tightly shut as people huddled inside, hoping to escape the pestilence. But there was no escape. The plague struck without mercy, and the once great city, already wounded by the kinstrife, was brought to its knees. As the death toll rose, the very fabric of Gondor began to fray. The capital was moved to Minas Aner in Ta 1640, and Osgiliath was abandoned, left to rot in the wake of tragedy. The city that had once been the heart of the kingdom, the place where Gondor's kings and nobles had ruled, was now little more than a ghost town. The Anduin flowed on as it always had, but its waters no longer carried the songs and laughter of Osgiliath's people. Now, it carried only memories, dark, bitter memories of loss and death. I knelt by the edge of the river, dipping my hand into the cool water. Somewhere beneath its surface, the Palantir lay lost and forgotten, just as the city itself had been. Osgiliath, the once proud jewel of Gondor, had become a symbol of everything the kingdom had lost: its unity, its strength, and its hope. I stood again, looking out over the ruins. Osgiliath had faced the horrors of war and disease, and though it had endured for centuries, its slow, inevitable decline had begun. The city that had once been the pride of Gondor was now a crumbling relic, haunted by the ghosts of its past. The streets, once full of life, were now empty. The great bridges that had spanned the Anduin were broken, and the grand buildings that had once stood as symbols of Gondor's power were reduced to rubble. And yet, as I stood there, the wind whispering through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that Osgiliath still held some spark of its former glory. Even in its ruin, the city had a kind of quiet dignity, a reminder of what it had once been. It had survived war and plague, and though it was no longer the heart of Gondor, it was not forgotten. Its stones still stood, and the Anduin still flowed past its shores, carrying with it the weight of history. Osgiliath had fallen, but Gondor endured, and as long as the kingdom stood, the memory of Osgiliath would live on, a reminder of both Gondor's greatest triumphs and its darkest days. The quiet ruins of Osgiliath seemed peaceful now, but I knew the peace was deceptive. The silence weighed heavily on me, a silence born not of tranquility but of abandonment, loss, and memories steeped in blood. I could feel the weight of its final, bitter fall pressing against me as I walked deeper into the heart of the city, which had once been the proudest jewel of Gondor. This place had borne witness to too many wars, too much suffering, and yet, even now, it stood, broken, but not forgotten, Osgiliath had not been truly alive for centuries. It had endured long enough to face its last brutal test, the invasion of the Uruks of Mordor. It was in TA 2475 that Osgiliath faced its final, deadly blow. I imagined the first sight of Mordor's Uruks as they surged across the Anduin like a tide of shadow. The defenders of Gondor, worn down by years of raids and skirmishes, had faced many threats before. But this was something different. The Uruks were larger and more vicious than the orcs Gondor had fought for centuries. They were organized, disciplined, and bred for one purpose: destruction. I stopped at the base of a broken tower, its stones blackened and scorched from ancient fires. This had once been one of Osgiliath's great watchtowers, a sentinel keeping vigil over the lands to the east, always on guard against the darkness that lay beyond the mountains. Now it was nothing more than a crumbled husk, its purpose lost to time. It had been here that Boromir, the son of Steward Denethor, led his men in a desperate attempt to retake the city from the invaders. He had fought valiantly, with all the bravery and determination that the blood of Numenor bestowed upon him, driving the Uruks from the western half of the city. But despite Boromir's heroism, the damage had already been done. The eastern part of Osgiliath had fallen, overrun by the dark creatures of Mordor. The Anduin, the great river that had once been the lifeblood of the city, now served as a barrier dividing what little was left of the city's defenders from the forces of evil that had claimed the eastern bank. The great bridge that connected the two halves of Osgiliath, once a marvel of Numenorian engineering, lay in ruins. I could almost see it as it had once stood, massive stone arches spanning the river, adorned with carvings of ancient kings and heroes, a symbol of the unity that once bound Gondor together. Now, only jagged stumps of stone jutted from the riverbanks, the rest swallowed by the dark waters of the Anduin. The bridge had not only connected the two sides of the city, but had also been a link between Gondor's proud past and its uncertain future. Its destruction marked the true beginning of the end for Osgiliath. As I walked along the western bank of the river, where the bridge had once stood, I imagined the soldiers of Gondor, battle-worn and weary, making their last stand here. The waters of the Anduin had run red with blood as Boromir's forces fought to hold the line. But no matter how fiercely they resisted, the tide of Mordor's forces was relentless. I could still hear the echo of battle in the wind, the clash of swords, the grunts of warriors locked in combat, and the distant, guttural cries of the Uruks as they charged across the ruined bridge. Boromir had succeeded in driving the invaders back, at least temporarily. But the victory was hollow. The eastern half of the city was lost, and with it, Osgiliath's true heart. The people of Gondor, who had once walked these streets in safety and peace, fled to Minas Tirith, leaving behind only the empty shells of buildings and the ghosts of what had been. The years passed, and Osgiliath remained abandoned, a city in ruins, but its strategic importance could not be forgotten. Centuries later, when the War of the Ring erupted, Osgiliath once again found itself at the center of the conflict between light and darkness. The city, already broken and desolate, would become a battleground once more. I found myself standing on the very edge of the western city, where the Anduin flowed quietly past. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ruined landscape. In the twilight, I could almost imagine what it had been like during the War of the Ring, when the Nazgul descended upon Osgiliath, leading Sauron's forces in a brutal assault. The city, though already a ruin, was still vital to the defense of Gondor. Whoever controlled Osgiliath controlled the crossing of the Anduin, and Sauron's forces sought to seize it to pave the way for the ultimate assault on Minas Tirith. The Nazgul, Sauron's most feared servants, had been the bane of Osgiliath's defenders. Even the bravest of men faltered when faced with their presence. For the Nazgul carried with them a terror that chilled the hearts of all who beheld them. Their arrival signaled the beginning of the end for Osgiliath. I walked through the debris of what had once been the eastern city. The ground beneath my feet was uneven, littered with broken stone and the remnants of buildings that had once towered proudly above the Anduin. Faramir, Boromir's younger brother, had been tasked with defending the city during the War of the Ring. He had fought valiantly, just as his brother had before him, leading his men against overwhelming odds. But even Faramir's courage could not hold back the tide of darkness that swept across the city. The eastern half of Osgiliath fell to Sauron's forces. Despite Faramir's best efforts, his men, outnumbered and outmatched, had been forced to retreat across the Anduin to the western side, making their last stand among the crumbling ruins of what remained. The city had become a battlefield once more, and the Anduin, once a peaceful river that had carried trade and life between the two halves of the city, became a deadly divide between Gondor and the armies of Mordor. The western side of the city fared little better. I stood in what remained of one of the city's great gates, its stone archway shattered and leaning precariously. This had been the site of the final defense, where Faramir's men had held the line against wave after wave of Mordor's forces. The streets that had once bustled with life and commerce were now filled with the bodies of fallen soldiers and the wreckage of war. Even as they fought to hold back the darkness, Faramir knew that Osgiliath was lost. He ordered his men to retreat to the Ramaz Esher, Gondor's outer ring of defenses, leaving behind the city that had once been the pride of their kingdom. Osgiliath was abandoned, left to the Uruks, the orcs, and the dark creatures that followed Sauron's banner. I knelt at the riverbank, where the Anduin flowed silently. It had witnessed the rise and fall of Osgiliath, carried the boats of kings, and now bore the memories of a city that had once been the beating heart of Gondor. The water was cool to the touch, and as I gazed into its depths, I wondered how much of Osgiliath still lay beneath its surface: lost treasures, forgotten ruins, and the echoes of the past. It was here, in the ruins of Osgiliath, that Faramir had fought his last battle before retreating to Minas Tirith. His bravery had bought Gondor precious time that allowed the White City to prepare for the siege that was to come. And though the city of Osgiliath had fallen, its final stand was not in vain. The stars were beginning to appear in the sky above me, faint and distant, their light reflected on the surface of the river. As I stood there, watching the stars shimmer on the water, I thought of Osgiliath's long history, the triumphs and the tragedies, the moments of hope and the depths of despair. The city was a ruin now, its walls broken and its streets empty, but its spirit still lingered in the air. The people of Gondor remembered Osgiliath not for its fall, but for the strength and courage that had been shown in its defense. Osgiliath had fallen, but Gondor endured. The city's ruins might never rise again, but its memory lived on, a testament to the resilience of its people and the strength of their will. As long as Gondor stood, Osgiliath would not be forgotten. I turned away from the river, the quiet of the night settling around me. The final fall of Osgiliath had been a tragedy, but it had also been a symbol of Gondor's strength and endurance that would outlast the ruins of the city itself. The ruins of Osgiliath stretched out before me, silent and still under the pale light of the rising moon. It was hard to imagine that this desolate place had once been the heart of Gondor. The city had stood as a beacon of hope and unity, a bridge between Gondor's past and future. Now, it was little more than a shadow of its former self. Its streets choked with weeds and its buildings crumbled into dust. And yet, there was a strange sense of peace here, an eerie stillness that seemed to hang over the ruins like a shroud. As I walked through the deserted streets, the past seemed to rise up around me. The broken columns, shattered walls, and twisted remnants of the city whispered of the glories and tragedies that had unfolded here. Each step I took seemed to echo with the footsteps of those who had come before: soldiers, kings, scholars, and common folk, all of whom had once called this city home. The Anduin River, flowing gently beside the city, remained unchanged, its waters carrying the same quiet murmur they had for thousands of years. The river had seen it all: the rise of Osgiliath, its golden age, its slow decline, and its eventual fall. Now it flowed past the ruins as if indifferent to the fate of the city, continuing its endless journey toward the sea. As I walked along the overgrown banks, I felt the weight of history pressing down upon me, the collective memories of all that had been lost. In the distance, I saw the remains of the Great Dome of Stars. It had once been one of Osgiliath's most magnificent structures, a shining symbol of Gondor's quest for knowledge and wisdom. The observatory had been a place where scholars and astronomers gathered to study the heavens, seeking to understand the mysteries of the stars and their connection to the fate of men. Now, all that remained were broken stones and twisted metal, the dome itself having long since collapsed into ruin. But even in its broken state, the site retained a certain majesty, a reminder of the greatness that had once defined this place. I paused near what had once been a grand square, now overtaken by wild grasses and creeping vines. It was easy to imagine the life that had once filled these streets, the bustling markets, the clatter of carts, the sound of children playing as their parents went about their business. Osgiliath had been a city of dreams, a place where hope had flourished even in the darkest of times. And yet, as I stood there, surrounded by the silence of the present, I could feel how fragile those dreams had been, how easily they had been shattered by the forces of time and war. As I continued to walk, the wind picked up, stirring the leaves and sending a faint chill through the air. It was then that I found myself standing before a particular spot that I had read about many times, a place of immense significance, though now it was nothing more than a patch of uneven ground covered with rubble. It was here, in the heart of West Osgiliath, that Faramir, the younger son of Denethor, had once stood on the edge of the river, watching as the funeral boat carrying his brother Boromir drifted down the Anduin toward the sea. Faramir had seen the boat in a vision, floating silently along the river. Boromir's body laid out in honor as it passed through the ruins of the city they had both fought to defend. It had been a moment of profound loss, not just for Faramir but for all of Gondor. Boromir had been a symbol of Gondor's strength, a warrior whose courage and leadership had inspired those around him. His death marked the end of an era, the final blow to a kingdom that had already suffered so much. I knelt down, running my fingers over the cracked stones, imagining what it must have been like for Faramir to stand here, alone in his grief, watching his brother disappear into the misty horizon. That moment, etched into the collective memory of Gondor, had been one of profound sorrow and loss. Boromir had been Gondor's hope for the future, and with his passing, the city seemed to have finally lost its last connection to the greatness it once represented. I stood again, looking out across the ruins. The remnants of Osgiliath told the story of a city that had endured much but had never truly recovered. War, plague, and strife had taken their toll, And yet there was something about this place that refused to be entirely forgotten. The echoes of the past were still here, lingering in the shadows and whispering through the broken stones. The night deepened, and the stars began to emerge in the sky above me. I looked up, recalling the tales of how, in the days of Osgiliath's splendor, the people would gather beneath the dome of stars to gaze upon these very same constellations. The stars were unchanged, as ancient and distant as they had always been, their light undimmed by the passage of time. They had watched over Osgiliath through all its triumphs and tragedies. And now, as the city lay in ruins, they continued to shine, a reminder of the enduring nature of hope. There was a strange comfort in that. As much as Osgiliath had fallen, as much as Gondor had suffered, there was still something eternal about the world. The stars were the same as they had always been, and in their light, there was a sense of continuity, of endurance. It was as if, despite everything that had happened, there was still hope for the future. I lingered for a long time in the ruins, the cool night air brushing against my skin as I took in the sight of the city's final resting place. Osgiliath had fallen, but its memory would live on. In the stars, in the river, and in the hearts of the people of Gondor. It had been the heart of the kingdom once, and though that heart had been broken, the spirit of Gondor remained strong. Finally, I made my way back to the edge of the city, where the Anduin flowed quietly beneath the moonlight. I knelt once more by the river's edge, dipping my hand into its cool waters. The Anduin had carried Boromir's funeral boat through these ruins, and now it carried the memories of Osgiliath itself. As I looked out over the water, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure, of quiet farewell. The stars above Osgiliath shone as they had for thousands of years, unchanged by the passage of time, and in their light, I could see the enduring spirit of Gondor, the same spirit that had driven its people to defend their lands against overwhelming odds. Osgiliath had fallen, but Gondor had not, and as long as Gondor endured, there was hope. With one last glance at the ruins behind me, I rose to my feet and began to walk away, leaving Osgiliath to its long, silent rest. The city was a ruin, yes, but in its quiet decay, there was a sense of peace, a peace that spoke not of defeat, but of resilience. The stars above and the river below were unchanged, and in their quiet constancy, I found hope for the future. As I turned toward the path that would lead me away from Osgiliath, I couldn't help but wonder if, one day, the city might rise again, rebuilt, restored to its former glory under the rule of Gondor's new king. Aragorn had brought hope back to the kingdom, and perhaps, in time, that hope would extend even to Osgiliath. But for now, the city would sleep, its dreams guarded by the stars above. The ruins of Osgiliath whispered still, but now they whispered of a quiet farewell. I found a quiet spot by the Anduin, where the river's gentle murmur lulled the landscape into a serene stillness. The ruins of Osgiliath loomed behind me, fading into the twilight, their jagged outlines softened by the deepening shadows. Sitting down on the grassy bank, I gazed out across the river, watching as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The stars seemed to hang low tonight, their light reflecting on the surface of the Anduin like scattered jewels. I couldn't help but think of how the same stars had shone down on Osgiliath in its prime, when the city had been the heart of Gondor, teeming with life and hope. So much had changed since then, and yet the stars remained distant, untouched by the passage of time. They had watched over the rise and fall of kingdoms, the ebb and flow of history, but their light never faltered. Osgiliath, too, had been a constant once. It had stood as a testament to the strength and unity of Gondor, a city built by Isildur and Anarion, twin sons of Elendil. In the early days of the kingdom, its streets had been filled with the laughter of children, the bustle of merchants, and the wisdom of scholars who studied the stars from the great dome of stars. But as the centuries wore on, the city fell victim to war, plague, and strife, its grandeur slowly eroded by the unrelenting march of time. Now, Osgiliath was little more than a ruin, its once great bridges shattered, its towers reduced to rubble. And yet, as I sat by the river, I couldn't help but feel that there was something enduring about the city, something that refused to be forgotten. The broken stones might have been silent, but they carried with them the memory of all that had come before, the stories of courage and sacrifice, of hope and despair, were woven into the very fabric of this place, lingering like a quiet echo that would never quite fade. The Anduin, flowing steadily beside me, seemed to carry those memories as well. It had borne witness to the rise of Osgiliath, to its glory days and its tragic fall. It had carried Boromir's funeral boat past these very banks. As his brother Faramir watched from the ruined city, the river had flowed through all of Gondor's history. And even now, it continued on its course, unchanged and unyielding. I thought of Boromir and Faramir, the two sons of Denethor, who had fought so fiercely to defend Gondor, and of Aragorn, who now ruled as king. Boromir had given his life to protect the ring-bearer, and Faramir had stood bravely in Osgiliath during the War of the Ring, holding the line against overwhelming odds. Their sacrifices had not been in vain. Gondor had survived the darkness of Sauron's shadow, and with the Dark Lord's defeat, a new age of peace had dawned. Aragorn, now King Elisar, had brought hope back to Gondor. Under his rule, the kingdom would rise again, stronger and more united than ever before. I wondered if, in time, Osgiliath might be restored as well. It seemed unlikely, with the city in such a state of ruin, but I couldn't shake the feeling that its story wasn't over. Perhaps, under Aragorn's guidance, Osgiliath could once again become a symbol of Gondor's strength and resilience, a city reborn from the ashes of its past. But that was a thought for another time. Tonight, as I sat by the river, I felt only a quiet sense of closure. Osgiliath had fallen, but it had not been defeated. The city had played its part in the long history of Gondor, and though its walls were broken, its spirit remained. In the soft light of the stars, I could feel that spirit all around me, as if the city itself were at peace, content to rest after so many years of turmoil. The stars above were brighter now, their light casting a faint glow over the landscape. I thought of the Dome of Stars, where the scholars of Osgiliath had once gathered to study the heavens, searching for wisdom in the movements of the constellations. Those same stars now shone down on me, unchanged, their light a reminder of the enduring nature of hope. No matter how dark the world had seemed, no matter how many battles had been fought and lost, the stars remained a constant source of guidance, both in times of peace and in times of war. As I rose to my feet, I took one last look at the ruins of Osgiliath. The city had once been the heart of Gondor, a place where kings had ruled and dreams had been forged. It had withstood countless trials, from the kin strife to the Great Plague, from the War of the Last Alliance to the final siege by Sauron's forces. And though it had fallen, its story was far from forgotten. Osgiliath would live on, not in stone, but in the hearts of those who remembered its history, who honored the sacrifices made within its walls. I turned toward the path that would lead me away from the city. The quiet rustle of the grass beneath my feet, the only sound in the night. The Anduin flowed beside me, its steady current a gentle reminder that life, like the river, always moves forward. As I walked away from Osgiliath, I carried with me the memories of all that had been, the glory, the fall, the resilience of a city that had once been the heart of Gondor. The stars shone brightly overhead, their light guiding me as I left the ruins behind. Osgiliath had been a place of dreams, and though those dreams had crumbled into dust, they had not been lost. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the horizon, the future awaited, a future filled with hope and renewal. And as long as Gondor stood, as long as its people looked to the stars for guidance, Osgiliath's legacy would endure. With one last glance at the city behind me, I whispered a quiet farewell. Osgiliath had fallen, but Gondor had risen, and in that rising, there was hope for a new beginning. The stars above, the same stars that had watched over Osgiliath in its prime, seemed to twinkle with a promise of endurance, a promise that, no matter how many ages passed, hope would always remain.